Welcome. I am Ed Wright, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Rabbi Marcus Breger Memorial Lecture for 2021. And we have a special day in sight ahead of you. So welcome. We're glad you're here. This is a effort of the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies, and also supporting us is the College of Social Behavioral Science, as well as the Jewish Federation of Southern Arizona, the Tucson Jewish Community Center, and the Tucson Marriott University Park Hotel. So thank you to all of those people who make the work of the Center for Judaic Studies possible. The Rabbi Breger Lecture. I just have things I want to say about Rabbi Breger. Before coming to Tucson, Rabbi Breger distinguished himself as a learned and progressive rabbi. He served as the Jewish community's leader, most progressive rabbi on the island of Rhodes, and the Av Beit Din. He was professor of Talmud at the island's renowned rabbinical seminary, the Collegio Rabbinico, which served the Jewish communities in the Balkans, Israel, Egypt, and Ethiopia from 1928 to 1938. And despite its relatively short history, the seminary became one of the premier rabbinical seminaries serving the Sephardic communities across the region. After the close of the seminary, amidst the outbreak of anti-Semitism on Rhodes in 1938, Breger, his wife, Dr. Bertha Breger, and his daughter, Leva, secured passage to the United States, eventually settling in Tucson. During World War II, Breger served in the US Army, where his leadership skills naturally emerged, allowing him to rise through the ranks from private to major and to become the highest ranking Jewish chaplain in the Pacific Theater. After the war, he returned to Tucson, where once again his robust scholarship and inspired leadership enabled him to become the Southwest's leading rabbi. Apart from his long and most successful rabbinate at Congregation Anshe Israel, Breger was instrumental in founding many Jewish educational and communal organizations in Tucson and the Southwest. Among those, the Judaic Studies program at the University of Arizona, where, beginning with just a handful of students in one Hebrew course and a single Judaica course, the Judaic Studies program grew through the years, becoming the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies in 2000. Rabbi Breger was both a congregational rabbi and a serious scholar. He published his dissertation in 1932, and his lasting commitment to the University of Arizona's Judaic Studies program is evident in the bequest of his personal library to the U of A's library, where it now serves as the cornerstone of the university's Judaica collection. The Arizona Center for Judaic Studies is very proud to present the Rabbi Dr. Marcus Breger Memorial Lecture Series in honor of this great man. His memory continues to be a blessing to us all. Really, the brainchild for this was his daughter, Leva, who passed away on October 2nd in 2016 at the age of 76. She was preceded in death by her husband Seymour Fierstein. Her children, Esther Netter, Judy Citron, and David Fierstein, join us each year for the lecture, and this year, join us virtually. I have to say that in my mind, Leva, in addition to being a daughter, wife, mother, grandmother, and community leader, was a great teacher. She embodied everything you imagine as a teacher to be. She brought light to the lives of many. But she's gone now and has enabled us to continue the Breger family tradition through this lecture series. And I think this year's lecture is precisely the kind of person that represents well the legacy of Rabbi Breger. Dr. Yizhar Hess received his BA in Hebrew Literature and Political Science from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a law degree from the Interdisciplinary Center, the IDC in Herzliya, and an MA in Jewish Studies from the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem. He then completed a Ph.D. At the University of Sussex in Brighton, England. As is well known among our audience, and this is where we get to the personal side. Among our audience today, Dr. Hess, Yizhar, served from 2000 to 2003 as the Tucson Jewish Community Shliach, this emissary. And he was director of the Ronald and Diane Weintraub Israel Center, whose mission is building a living bridge to Israel, its people, and history. You know, I might add that Diane and Ron, in addition to creating the Israel Center at the JCC, also endowed a scholarship endowment, created a scholarship endowment to provide students with travel money for trips to Israel, where they enroll in accredited courses at Israeli universities. I also want to take a second to acknowledge Yizhar Hess. Yael, Yizhar's wife, was an instructor in our Hebrew program for the years that they were in Tucson, and she touched the lives of many people. I hope Yael is watching now, and Yael, we all send you our warmest greetings as well as Achiad and Micha. This family has had a transformative impact on our community, both on the campus and in our local community. So, in addition to all of the things he's accomplished educationally, Dr. Hess became director of partnerships for the Jewish Agency in Israel for several years. In 2007, he was appointed CEO of the Masorti movement, the Israeli equivalent of the conservative movement. And in that position, he led efforts to bridge the divide between the Orthodox and non-Orthodox streams of Judaism. This is one of the central issues in Israel's effort to remain a Jewish and democratic state. And Yizhar, whom I've been following for quite some time through the media, has for years been one of the vocal leaders at the forefront of those efforts to bridge those gaps in Israel. In fact, he was, I would say, the key negotiator with the Israeli government regarding the egalitarian prayer at the Coattail, the Western Wall. All this prepared him for his most recent appointment as vice chair of the World Zionist Organization. From this position, he has the ability to impact a wide range of issues that are important to both Israelis and the diasporic Jewish communities. In this presentation, he will explore a topic that fits well the ethos of this Rabbi Marcus Breger Memorial Lecture. The title of his presentation today is, quote, Confessions of a Hopeful Realist, the Role of Religion and State in Israeli Politics. At the end of Dr. Hess's presentation, we will have time for a question and answer. If you look at your screen at the bottom, you'll see an icon for Q&A. During the course of the lecture, if you will go ahead and put your questions in there, we'll read them, as many as we can, after his presentation. If you'd like me to also acknowledge your name, go ahead and put that in there too. If it just comes with an email address, I won't say anything, but if you add your name, I'll give your personal touch to that as well. It's with that I turn it over to Dr. Yizhar Hess. Welcome, Yizhar.
Thank you so much, Ed, for this welcoming and warm introduction. I'm so excited. I'm so happy to be back in Tucson. It's virtually, but it feels home. I'm sitting here in my office in Jerusalem in the National Institutions building today in the same floor that David Ben-Gurion sat for more than a decade as the head of the World Zionist Organization and as Prime Minister after the declaration of the State of Israel. And I feel privileged. I feel privileged to serve on behalf of the Jewish people in the World Zionist Organization. And I feel privileged also to bring the voices that I learned to appreciate when I was Shaliach in Tucson, in your side of the ocean. And on that, maybe I'd like to start. I was recently elected by the Zionist Congress to my position, but for the last 13 years, I was the executive director of the Masorti movement in Israel, as you said, Ed. And it wasn't a given that I will be dedicating my professional career to Jewish peoplehood and to Jewish pluralism in Israel. And it has to do with the experience that I had in Tucson. I was born in Jerusalem in 1967, in July. exactly 1 month after the Six-Day War, to a regular family, a secular family in Jerusalem, had a good childhood as Yeled Tov Yerushalayim, your average kid in Jerusalem. Educated parents, caring. I went to a good elementary school and good high school. I was a counselor in the Scouts. A regular path of an Israeli kid. And at the age of 18, yes, at the age of 18, I was drafted to the army like most Israelis. This is where I met my wife, Yael, that some of you know. That was, of course, as a family, we were as shlichim in Tucson. And so I met her in the army. She stayed in the army. That was her career. She was just released from the army about 3 years ago in the rank of colonel. And I left the army after a few years, went to the Hebrew U, and then studied as you just described so accurately, Ed. And yet at the age of 30, Yael was back then a major, I think, or a captain. I'm not sure if it was a captain or a major. And I was a young lawyer, just passed the Israeli bar. We saw an ad in the paper. And the ad was a Jewish agency ad that was looking for shlichim to come to work in Jewish federations in North America. And we didn't know so much about that position, but something kara lanu, something happened. In Hebrew, the word kara has two meanings. One, a call, and also happened. So kara in both ways, I think, was something that happened to us when we saw this ad. And we found ourselves 8 months later in Tucson, Arizona, with our firstborn, Achiad. He was 4 years old back then. And our second, Mika, was born already in Tucson. She is a native Tucsonan. I think that's the right expression. And I remember how a few weeks or months after we arrived, one of the first things that took our attention was the fact that not in Jerusalem, that I was born 10 generations ago. I come from a family of 10 generations in Jerusalem. So not in Jerusalem where I was born, I was able to be exposed to and to experience Judaism in a way that I was able to experience and to learn about and to be attached by and to be engaged to as I was in Tucson. And this pluralistic approach to Judaism, this very basic fact that there is more than one way to be Jewish, is something that took our attention as individuals, Yael, myself, and as a family. And I think also already during the shlichut, during our time in Tucson, between 2000 to 2003, I knew already that I won't be going back to Israel to practice law, but that my desire, my passion is to work on Jewish peoplehood and on the connection between the state of Israel and world Jewry, and also about trying to fix what needs to be fixed in Israel when it comes to religious diversity and religious pluralism. This is something that I'm very much involved in. Of course, when I was the CEO of the Masorti movement in Israel, but also in my position. My current position is a political position. I was elected to this position by the Congress because of the numbers of mandates, the numbers of seats, the numbers of delegates that we had in the Zionist Congress. And when I say we, I talk about Merkaz Olami. Merkaz is the political arm of the conservative Masorti movement within the Zionist Congress. It's a little complicated. We will not get into it, but I see my role in this position to broaden the Zionist tent in a way that more and more Jews all over the globe will feel that they need to be invested and need to influence what Zionism is and what Zionism means, because otherwise Zionism will be taken. And we feel that Zionism, as it was from the very beginning, it can be pluralistic, democratic, humanistic, diverse as the Jewish people are. And this is something that I'm focusing on my day job. And today I'd like to go with you on a journey that would analyze the Israeli society, the Israeli history, when it comes to state and religion. I will go through the way things developed. I will touch upon some of the main tensions that we have today in Israel when it comes to state and religion. And I will try to think with you, what can we expect and what could be meant in Israel's politics today. I hope it would be, it would bring you, with a sense of criticism, also some hope. I'll try to do these two things. I'll share with you my screen now. Okay. So the first image that I would like to share with you is this wonderful image. It took me a while before I learned what is this picture all about. I saw it, by coincidence. I was surfing the net, the internet one day, a few years ago already, and saw this wonderful picture. I didn't know when it was taken. I didn't know who are the people, but something in this picture took my attention immediately, and I spent hours staring at this picture. Well, I came to learn that it was taken in 1947, November 29th, Kaftet November 29th, 1947, of course, in Tel Aviv. It was in Mughrabi Square, that doesn't exist anymore, next to the Mughrabi Cinema that doesn't exist anymore, but that was the main center of Tel Aviv. That was the circle, the place to go to in Tel Aviv when you had a rally. And this rally was a spontaneous rally that took place on November 29th, when the UN voted on the separation plan. And spontaneously, all over the land of Israel back then, wherever were Jews in the land of Israel, people went out and celebrated on the streets. And one of the things that is so vivid in this picture, it's not necessarily the flag, and it's not that little young woman with someone putting a hand on her head, but rather the dominanta of this picture are the pair of eyes. Look at almost each and every pair of eyes in this picture. Look how joyful they are, how fulfilled, how happy, how they are like excited to celebrate, to feel that moment. And that moment was a unique moment in Jewish history, no doubt. That moment of joy that filled hearts of Jews all over Israel, and in some places all over the world, was also definitely because of the fact that it was independence coming, and in 6 months from that moment, David Ben-Gurion will be reading the Declaration of Independence, but also because of the core values that were part of Zionism from the very beginning. And from the very beginning of Zionism, democracy and pluralism was one of its core aspects. One of the things that I'm so proud to be so proud of as a Zionist is the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. It's a declaration that was signed in the midst of our independence war, Milchemet HaShichrur, a war that was probably the most horrific war that Israel ever had. 1% of the population died in that war. There were 600,000 Jews living in Israel, and 1% of that population died in the war. It was such a horrible war, but yet in the midst of the war, it was important enough to the leaders of the Yishuv, to the leaders, Jewish leaders of the World Zionist Organization back then, to decide what would be the rules, what would be the protocol, what would be the framework that we will be living by. And it's true that Israel doesn't have a constitution. And if you look for something that is like a constitution, it might be this Declaration of Independence, but yet it does set in stone the core values of who we are. And I'm proud that in the midst of that war, it was important enough to put in writing and to sign who we are as far as a country. But you shouldn't be that surprised that this is the way it was put together, because if you look back to Herzl's vision, I won't be reading it for you, but I'm sure that you can. This is a quote from Herzl from 1896. It was his from the Jewish state, Medinat HaYehudim, one of his famous books. And he wrote about a tension that he understood back then already, that will be a tension that should be addressed before the state is being declared. He was very much aware of Jewish history, and he was very much aware that when you come to implement a dream into realization, you need to put into consideration the forces that might jeopardize its ability to do things right. And I'll get in a second, we'll see why it didn't work in the same way that Herzl wanted. And definitely, I'm not sure that I'm standing behind every sentence in this quote from Herzl. It's quite radical, it's quite harsh even, but yet it is important to see that these tensions that we are struggling with were not unpredictable. As you can see, Herzl, the visionary, the prophet of the state of the Jews, definitely understood that Houston, we might have a problem here. And Herzl did notice that ahead of time. Now, let's dig in. Let's start the journey in analyzing the tension between state and religion in Israel. And I will have, with permission, two disclaimers before that. One of them, it's an important tension within the Israeli society. This is something that affects dramatically Jewish peoplehood. This is why I'm so invested in it. This is why it is so important to me. It's not the only tension that the Israeli society is facing. It's not the only tension that the state of Israel is dealing with. And I'm not talking now about the pandemic or other things that the rest of the world is dealing with too. I'm talking about, the things that Israel is definitely challenged by since its existence, since it was declared. Okay, the tension between Israel and its neighbors, between Jews and Arabs within the state, it's a big thing that I'm not definitely it's worth a lecture to its own. I'm focusing now not on economy, not on that tension, but on state and religion, because I think it's fundamental to the survival and to the future of the state of Israel. And by analyzing it, I'm not minimizing any other tension. The second disclaimer, and on that I'm more hesitant, so please bear with me. I'm a Zionist. I was born in Israel. I love Israel. I care for Israel. I speak Hebrew. I even dream in Hebrew. I served in the army. My wife dedicated her professional life to the army, and my son served in the army. My daughter Mika is about to be drafted to the army. Yet, so I don't have to prove that I really love my country. Having said that, I will criticize my country this evening, my loved country this evening, even quite dramatically. I feel that when you love something and when you love someone, sometimes the way to fix this relationship is also by criticizing it. So, and yet I feel a bit uncomfortable, talking so with such criticism about Israel, especially when I'm talking to audiences that are not living in Israel and to audiences that I really want them to love Israel and to care for Israel. But as we know, reality is not rosy. And when you put reality as if it is rosy and it's not the reality, it doesn't necessarily help to create frank relationships. And I love Israel, but I fight for better Israel. And I do it on daily basis. I'm activist on this, and it's not always pleasant. And this is something that sometimes has a price, and I do it loudly and vocally. And I do it because I also look at Navi Yeshayahu, Prophet Isaiah, Leman Zion lo echasheh, for the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. And this is something that we need to remind ourselves when we sometimes criticize heavily something that we love. So I'm putting it as a disclaimer. Please don't understand me as bashing Israel, God forbid, but definitely working even radically, as I think we should all do, and we should all be, to make Israel a better place. Because this is one of the core values of who we are here in Israel and all over the world. Okay, now let's begin. I'd like to begin with David Ben-Gurion. I admire David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was definitely, after Herzl, one of the prophets who was able to understand history in a very unique way, who was able to understand in 1948 that this is the time to declare independence. There were many voices against it. There were many people who didn't think it's the right time. It was obvious that a war is just about to begin, so we should be very cautious. David Ben-Gurion understood what needs to be done, and he did it dramatically and forcefully. Having said that, he was a politician. And when he had tensions, when he had challenges, he dealt with them like a politician. And the tension between state and religion started basically to be a critical component of the coming state that was not even declared at the very last commission that the UN sent to Palestine on 1947. It was the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, and David Ben-Gurion wanted, this is the picture from that committee, he gave his testimony, he prepared himself for weeks to that testimony. He knew how important it is to convince that committee that he was indeed respectable by the entire Yishuv, the entire Jewish population in Israel. Now, today we know that it was a secret whether this commission would indeed put on the table a suggestion for a partition plan. But in this building that I'm sitting today, there was a unit that its role was, it's an intelligence secret unit that its role was to in ways that I'm not sure how, to listen to the deliberations of that committee. But in any event, David Ben-Gurion was very tense before giving his testimony. And he knew that in order to convince the committee that he is the leader of the Jewish population in Israel, he will need to convince all segments of the Jewish populations back then, all the segments of the Jewish society back then in Palestine, to stand behind him, or at least not to give a contra testimony to the committee. And he was most bothered by the ultra-Orthodox. He was bothered by them because he wasn't religious. He was an atheist, as we all know. He was a socialist. He knew that if he is able to convince them not to give a contra testimony, he'll probably convince the committee. And therefore, he sent a letter, like a politician, like a sophisticated politician. He sent a letter to the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel back then, Agudat Israel, in a letter that is known up until today as the Status Quo Letter. And basically, he promised to the leadership of the ultra-Orthodox in the Jewish society in Palestine back then that if indeed the state of Israel will be declared, 4 elements in this state will be understood, will be interpreted by the Orthodox standard of those elements. Shabbat is one of them. That's the easiest one. It was obvious for everyone that Shabbat will be the day of rest in the Jewish state. You know, it's obvious. It's a given. Not Sunday by Shabbat. So it makes sense. At the same time, when I bring that thing to today's Israel, what does it mean? Does the public sphere need to respect Shabbat in an Orthodox standard? I'm not sure. Does it necessarily mean that there will be no public transportation in Israel on Shabbat? Why? Because Orthodox do not drive on Shabbat. Therefore, the public sphere in Israel should not allow public transportation. I'm not sure. But still, Shabbat is not the most serious thing that we had in this status quo letter. Secondly, kashrut. Again, something that I must tell you that I do understand was it was a necessity, because if you have the kitchen in the army, in the IDF, of course it should be kosher. And not only that, I can understand why, of course, it should be kosher in the more strict way, meaning in the Orthodox interpretation of kashrut. It does mean, it does have a lot of sense, because if you have a unit made of Jews and others, all walks of Judaism, it does mean that we all need that the kitchen will be a place where everyone could eat. Again, if I'm jumping from that core principle that should be respected to today's kashrut in Israel, to the fact that there is a monopoly over kashrut, the fact that only the chief rabbinate, which is Orthodox, supervises the kashrut, will touch upon it later on in this presentation. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the only way to analyze it. The third, marriage and divorce. Marriage and divorce in Israel can be done only via the chief rabbinate, which is Orthodox. It brings to our attention the fact that Israel, as a democracy, does not respect all habits and all customs of Judaism. And when it comes to your personal status, marriage, divorce, it is a drama. We'll touch upon it. And the last thing is education. They were afraid, the ultra-Orthodox back then, that David Ben-Gurion will take over their education system. They wanted to make sure that it won't happen. On that, I think they were right. David Ben-Gurion would surely do it unless he promised not to do it. They wanted to protect their children from being taught things that they didn't believe that they should know, from core curricula to humanities. You can agree with it, you cannot agree with it, but I think that if you respect the fact that parents should be involved and should be even heavily involved in what their children are studying, I think that you can respect it. In any event, this is the status quo letter, and one would think that a letter that was signed in 1947 would not be living in today's politics of Israel. And of course, this is a big mistake. This status quo letter, even these two words, status quo, are vivid, are active in Israel's coalition agreement up until today in each and every coalition. And one of the things that puts us really in, it is even embarrassing me to share with you this screen of freedom of marriage. This is a map that was put together by Chidush. It's one of the organizations that are dealing with the Jewish pluralism, and it's a freedom of marriage map, and it analyzes the world by color. Okay, in black, it's countries where there is no freedom of marriage, when a couple cannot decide how he or she are getting married. And here you see Israel in black, in like many other countries that we're not so proud to be associated with when it comes to our democratic nature. And the fact that today in Israel, only an Orthodox rabbi that is authorized by the chief rabbinate could officiate a wedding in Israel. And Rabbi Eisen or Rabbi Cohen or other rabbis, known and appreciated rabbis in Tucson, their wedding will not be accepted in Israel. Furthermore, if they do a wedding in Israel, it might be a felony, a criminal felony. This is something that I'm very much ashamed of. And, it's not only because of the fact that I'd like more diversity in Israel. It's also because of the fact that when the Orthodox interpretation of halakha is the interpretation that would sit on the Beit Din, on the court, on the rabbinical court, when God forbid that couple is coming to get their divorce, it also means that in many cases, the rights of the woman, the more weak side of that equation, according to the Orthodox interpretation of halakha, this is something that also needs to be bear in mind. And God forbid, I'm not against Orthodoxy at all. I'm not an Orthodox basher, legamre lo. But when there is only one interpretation on the table, it means that men and women are not equally treated, because Orthodoxy does not pretend to equal men and women equally, and it's fine. I respect it. But when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, I think it's a big challenge, and it brings me to the understanding, the harsh understanding, that Israel today is the only democracy in the world where Jews do not have freedom of religion. The only Western country in the world that does not offer freedom of religion to Jews is the state of the Jews. And this is such a failure in our democracy. This is something that I really feel that needs to be fixed as soon as possible, and definitely a big obstacle. By the way, David Ben-Gurion did not do it because he thought it's the right thing to do. He really believed this is him and Paula, his wife, and this is where they are buried on the Ramon crater in the Negev. David Ben-Gurion was one of the Zionist atheist socialists and that generation really believed that Jewish religion as a religion is just about to step down from history. Religion at large, he thought that would not be relevant. It will be something from museums. Therefore, when he signed this letter, I think, I'm thinking on his in his shoes for a second. I think that he said, well, I will sign it in a few more years. They will understand. Most of the Jews would understand that religion is not relevant. So therefore, I'm not giving much. By the way, he never married Paula, his wife, in a Jewish wedding. They married in New York in a civil marriage. What he thought would not be relevant to many Israelis wasn't relevant to him. Yet he signed that letter that chained us all to one interpretation, which is a big mistake on his behalf. Something about the reason why it never changed in Israel. As we all know, this is the Knesset, our parliament. Israel's democratic system is different than the US, for the good, for the bad, as we all know. One of the things that needs to be remembered that we have a coalition government, meaning in order to be the prime minister, you are not only, it's not connected to the number of seats that your party got in the elections, but it is linked to your ability to convene a coalition of 61, of at least 61. If we have 120 members of the Knesset, you need to put together a coalition of 61. And it means from the very beginning of the state of Israel that compromises had to be made. In order to be a prime minister, you need to compromise on your values. It has pros. It has pros because you need to reach a consensus and then you take more people with you. So it has cons. Of course, it has lots of challenges. I know it has cons, it has pros, of course, because a consensus sometimes is most likely good, but it has cons because changing things, especially radical things, especially things that there are small minority groups that dramatically care about, and they have the power to decide who would be the prime minister. It gives those small parties huge power. And political power, this is what matters in politics, is not necessarily the number of seats that you have in the Knesset, but your ability to play with that number. And religious parties, both ultra-Orthodox and not ultra-Orthodox, were for many years the ones to call the shots, the one to decide whether that person would be prime minister or the other person. And therefore, one of the things that were stable from the very first beginning of the State of Israel up until today was the status quo. Big changes were not accomplishable, unfortunately. And today I will touch upon a few of the obstacles, a few of the tensions that we live by, and the ways that we find in order to fix them slowly. I hope surely, but at least for sure I can tell you that it's slowly. One of them is, of course, conversion. Changing your religion in Israel from one religion to the other is something that can be done. But if it's done in Israel, it can be done, unfortunately, only via the chief rabbinate. And even though by going to the courts, we were able to get a ruling on our favor, meaning reform or a conservative conversion is recognized in Israel, at least for being listed in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. But the big thing is marriage. And since you could be considered Jewish, but you don't have any ability to marry in Israel because your Judaism is not recognized by the chief rabbinate, and the chief rabbinate has, as I said, monopoly over marriage. This is something that discriminates converts, non-Orthodox converts on a substantial way. If you were converted outside of Israel, again, you will be eligible for Aliyah, for coming to Israel and get its citizenship, but you won't be able to marry in Israel. So there is a growing number, and a big number already, of people in Israel that cannot marry in Israel. Not that they want to choose a different rabbi and it will not be accepted, but they cannot marry in Israel. So it's, of course, it's much more serious. Second thing that I would like to touch upon just shortly is kashrut. The monopoly over kashrut. I think that the Jewish state definitely should deal with regulating kashrut. But giving a monopoly to one interpretation of kashrut, this is something that is simply not acceptable. Not acceptable because of the moral standard of who we are as Jews. There is more than one way to be Jewish, and then there is more than one way to interpret the kashrut laws. Secondly, from an economical point of view, I'm sure that many of you visited Israel. Many of you went into an Israeli supermarket. Many of you saw that your favorite cereal in Israel costs in dollars more than it costs in your grocery in Tucson, and not only in Costco, but also in other chains. And it's not only, but it is mostly due to the kashrut regulation. Between 3 to 8%, Israel is more expensive in food because of the kashrut monopoly, because it's not only to have one kashrut certificate, it's in many cases more than 3 or 4, because in order to sell it to a wider public, and because you want to take care of the competition, and because if you don't get it, you might be boycotted. Many industries are taking more than one kashrut, Haredi kashrut of that, Haredi kashrut of that, Ashkenazi and Sfaradi, and more the merrier. And of course, it comes to at the end, to the cost of the product. This is something that if we have time, I'll share with you some stories about, but I'd like to leave some place for Q&A at the end. One of the unique things and the most troubling thing, and I will touch upon it in a second, is kashrut of wine. A few years ago, I was approached by a winemaker in the South, and he was shocked. He told me, "Listen, I want to get the conservative Masorti Ashgacha on my wine." And I said, it's forbidden by the law, because according to the law, the word kosher, the word kasher, can be given only by chief rabbinate. So why do you want not the chief rabbinate, meaning the Masorti movement, to give you a kashrut? And he said, "Listen, it's not about the money. They didn't want a lot of money. It wasn't about any kind of corruption. It was what they demanded from me." And he said, "I'm driving on Shabbat. And according to the Orthodox interpretation of halakha, of the Jewish law, if you are not Shomer Shabbat, you cannot produce kosher wine. And he was shocked by it. He said, I'm such a dedicated and devoted Jew. How come? Because I drive on Shabbat, I cannot produce kosher wine in Israel? And indeed, he was right. This is the Orthodox interpretation of halakha. And he said, doesn't the conservative movement, don't you have a different tshuva? So actually, we do. If you read Rabbi Professor Elia Dor from U of A, from the Ziegler Rabbinical School, you'll see a very thick and long and complicated tshuva about producing wine. And of course, there is an halachic approach that would allow keeping Shabbat in a different way and still producing kosher wine. But in Israel, it is not accepted. So it's a small thing that has to do only with wine, but it tells you in a nutshell something that needs to be addressed. When there is a monopoly over kashrut, when there is a monopoly to one segment of Judaism about something, it doesn't matter if that monopoly is Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, or otherwise. A monopoly is a monopoly. And that monopoly allowed a big hotel in central Jerusalem to tell a huge congregation coming from New York, conservative congregation coming from New York, that they won't be able to have a Kabbalat Shabbat in their hotel, because on that Kabbalat Shabbat they wanted to use, it was 500 people, they wanted to use a sound system, because 500 people, how would they hear? And the executive director of the hotel came to them and said, listen, if I allow you to use a sound system in your closed hall that I'm giving you, my kashrut certificate will be taken from me, because according to the Orthodox interpretation of halakha, as we know, sound system is not allowed on Shabbat. So these kinds of things touch the public sphere in Israel and do touch the relationships of Jews in Israel and outside of Israel in a way that I care very much about. I will touch for a few minutes about the Coattail, and then we'll open to Q&A. That was one of the tensions that painted the state and religion dilemmas in Israel for the last few years, and definitely painted the connection between Jews who live in Israel and outside of Israel. The dispute about the Coattail. The Coattail, as we know from history, was not a place with a mechitza. Both the Turkish, the Ottomans, and the British mandate did not allow a mechitza in the Coattail. It's not the Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews, didn't want mechitza back then. They did want, but the government of back then did not allow it, and Jews knew how to cope with it. As you can see, they davened together, they prayed together, men and women. It all changed when the opportunity came into our history, 1967, the year when I was born. These are pictures from the very first days after the end of the war, when the Coattail Plaza was put together, was arranged. It was a moment in Israeli history of enthusiasm, as we know. Not only in Israel, also around in Jewish communities around the world. But what happened in the Coattail was a serious, I think, fundamental moment when Jews from all walks of life felt at home and celebrated, danced together, men and women, in these very first days, because it felt like a national site that belongs to everyone. Unfortunately, this is not how things happened. And as you can see in the Coattail Plaza today, the barriers between men and women, the mechitza is quite high. It's even higher than you see here in the picture. And the mechitza that was put for the first time in Jewish history in 1967 decided that women need less place than men, which is something that definitely should be discussed. But the Coattail became such a big dispute over the activities of women of the wall, that for more than 30 years fought to have their right to have minyan nashim, to daven in a women-only minyan in Ezrat Nashim, in the women's section of the wall. It was a battle. It is a battle of 30 years that did not end, unfortunately. And a few years ago, in 2012, Anat Hoffman, the chair of Women of the Wall was arrested. It was in all the newspapers of the world, the Herald Tribune, New York Times, Financial Times. It was a serious thing, not only among the Jewish papers, and it was basically because it could not be understood that a Jewish woman is being arrested in the most sacred place for the Jews for something the Jews do, meaning put talit. She was arrested for putting a talit, something that everyone knows as a Jewish symbol, and for many women, more women in the Jewish world, respected as a respectable Jewish symbol. And here in Jerusalem, in the capital of the Jewish state, she was arrested because of doing such an obvious thing. It led the prime minister back then and today, Benjamin Netanyahu, to start serious negotiations with us, with the leadership of the streams, both Reform and conservative Masorti, with the leadership of JFNA, it's the Jewish Federations of North America, with Natan Sharansky, with the secretary of the cabinet back then, Avichai Mendelblit. Serious discussions of 4 years, hundreds of meetings that we had in order to reach an agreement that would be a compromise that everyone could live with. It was, again, endless meetings with the prime minister, without the prime minister, sitting with him and learning what he thinks, sitting for hours and hours with his aides until 2016, where we were able to reach an agreement and sign that agreement. In January 2016, the Coattail agreement, the Coattail compromise came into realization, and basically it said that the Coattail, the western wall of the temple, has more than one side to it. Meaning, as you can see here, there is the known western wall that you know from the left side, but on the right side here, an archaeological dig that known as Robinson Arch is exactly the same western wall of Temple Mount. And therefore, there was an understanding that we could expand what the Coattail means, and we took a big, serious compromise here and accepted the concept of a new side of the Coattail, a smaller one, a boutique one, that looks differently without that big plaza, but that speaks in a more relaxed way. It's not an ideal compromise. I'm not sure that we did the right thing when we accepted it, but at the end of the day, we did accept, and in January 2016, it was accepted. Unfortunately, 6 months later, it was tabled by the same government who accepted it and who signed the agreement with us. And this is where we are today, in a way, stuck with an agreement that was signed 5 years ago, but was never, ever respected. One of the things that is like an open wound between Jews living in Israel and Jews living outside of Israel, that demonstrates basically the fact that the religious diversity in Israel is not respected, is the Coattail as a symbol, a place that should have been uniting us all together, and indeed, because of what happened, doesn't unite us, to say it mildly. Complicated? Yes, complicated. Definitely complicated, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic, A, because this is my nature, and B, because Zionism is really also about optimism. Think about the reality that Herzl was challenged by when he came up with this ridiculous idea of having a Jewish state. Think about the reality of David Ben-Gurion 70-something years ago, when he had to face a reality when it was obvious that it's not a given that we will be winning whatever we want up until now. So I do strongly believe that Zionism, it's about optimism, and I'm optimistic, as Herzl was. This is Herzl gives a speech in the Second Congress in 1898. It was 6 years before he passed away at the age of 44, only 44, much older than Dr. Wright and myself. And he came with an idea, with a dream that was more likely not to be implemented than it was. And he said, it will be implemented, If not in 5 years, in 50 years. And boy, he was right. 50 years later, it was implemented. And today, Jewish diversity in Israel, if not by the government, but you know, from bottom up, is raising. And I'm proud to share with you some of the statistics about the fact that Jewish diversity in Israel today, when it comes to the different streams, the different denomination, is growing dramatically, really dramatically. And I encourage you to read this publication of JPPI, Raising Streams by Dan Pfefferman. It's an interesting, serious survey about that phenomena. And also, I'm proud because optimism leads me to compare between these two images. You can see here a Palmach officer named Ziva Arbel. It's a picture that was taken in 1948 next to the city of Modi'in. There was no city of Modi'in, only Ya'ar ben Shemen. But you can see how from the very beginning of Zionism, feminism and equal rights between men and women was indeed something to be proud of. And of course, the leadership of Golda Meir, who was up until today the only female prime minister of the state of Israel. But it tells you something about the nature of the dream. And a pioneer of today, at least to me, is Rabbi Chaya Rowan Becker, a rabbi in Jerusalem who leads a congregation in the heart of Jerusalem and creates a different notion of what pioneering, being a pioneer is. And to me, these three figures, you know, Ziva, Golda, and Chaya, to me tells you in a nutshell the optimism that I try to bring to the table when I speak about Zionism and about Zionism of today. I will stop here and open for remarks and questions if there are.
Thank you, Yizhar. That was outstanding. You've enlightened us in a great way, and the questions are starting to pop in. There are some regarding the Coattail, regarding marriage, and I'll just start with this question. As an attorney, how do you see this is relating to the marriage issue. How do you see this being resolved? Or is it a political issue or both?
So yes, it's definitely a political issue, definitely. The good news, there are two segments of the reason why I'm optimistic about it. Secondly, even now, 20% of the Israelis do not get married via the chief rabbinate, and this number is growing. People, young people who believe that they would like to take ownership on their rights and on their Judaism and decide to get married outside of the chief rabbinate. It means that they could not register in Israel as couple. But today, many of the municipalities and in many other institutions in Israel, there is like a solution that respects their unity in a way that you could call it like a common law marriage. It is not registered as such, but still it is something that you can live by and you can get most benefits of being a married couple. I'm encouraging people to do so. Secondly, is the fact that today, you know, Israel is going to a fourth round of election in 2 years. And the coming elections are in March 29th, a month from now. It's like 30 or something days from now. And I can tell you that a few parties are talking now publicly and loudly about civil marriage in Israel. It's Yesh Atid, it's Israel Beitenu, it's the Labor Party. And even in some of the moderate right-wing parties that are not orthodox, this talk is being, this declaration is being deliberated. So it gives me a sense of optimism that it's on the table now. Will it be solved in the next few years? I'm not sure. Will the young people would make it happen because they simply not go to the chief rabbinate, or it would be a legal thing that will be voted in the Knesset? I'm not sure, but I'm optimistic that that thing will be changed, that thing will be changed.
Okay, great. Here's another one. How and when do you think the Coattail issue will be, in fact, resolved?
Wow, that's a challenging one. You know, I must tell you two things. One, I do believe that the Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted this deal to be implemented. I heard him several times in intimate gatherings, and I'm convinced that when he offered that deal after 4 years of negotiations, he was certain that he will be able to implement it and to pass it through. It didn't work. And it didn't work because he bended to the ultra-Orthodox parties who demanded to withdraw from that decision. A few months before the last elections, we had a meeting with Benny Gantz, who went with Netanyahu to that unity government. And he said, I'm not sure that they were able to do many things in the state of religion. One thing I guarantee, it's the Coattail deal. I will make sure that if I get into the government, I'll take care of it. Well, as we know, it didn't happen. Therefore, I'm very cautious when I'm talking about my predictions to the coming government. If indeed it will be a government that is not a right-wing Orthodox government, I think the likelihood of the Coattail deal to be implemented is high. If not, we'll wait. You know, we need to remind ourselves that it's also being deliberated in courts. So maybe it will be a court ruling, but I rather have it be political than in court, because we all deserve a political decision on that thing.
Good. Well, you mentioned the elections. A question here from Dan Asia. Under this parliamentary system, is there any chance that the ultra-Orthodox party's influence can be in some way limited so that other streams can take their place in the larger culture?
Hey, Dan, it's so wonderful to see you or to hear you. Dan, you know, it won't happen by night, yet there is a strong discourse, and especially after the behavior of some segments of the Haredi community in Israel during COVID-19, that the fact that they, some of them are practically living within an autonomy in Israel without necessarily respecting the government laws, there is a discourse that says, listen, enough is enough. We need to take care of it immediately. One of the parties that is leading it very forcefully now in this campaign is Israel Beitenu, Lieberman's party. Other parties are not doing it as aggressively, but I think that there is a consensus, at least in the half part of the Israeli society, that it needs to be changed dramatically. Furthermore, when it doesn't come to vote, meaning if you do a poll about views of the public, it's 70 to 70% of the people of Israel believe that it needs to, that this monopoly or this behavior needs to put to its end. Politically, it's more complicated. Again, if there is a party with, if indeed that more moderate side of the Israeli society will be taking and will be winning these elections, I'm optimistic. If it won't happen this time, it will be way more challenging for years to come. So it is critical elections that we are about to have within a month.
Here's a question from Leonard Schultz. What about military service, specifically by the Haredim? A few years ago, when both Bibi and Lapid were part of the governing coalition, we heard a compromise had been reached. Where does that issue stand today?
It is stuck. There was an attempt on that government, it was, I think, 3 years ago, to force a drafting bill that would force the Haredim to go to the army. You know, I must tell you that on that, I'm as practical as it could be. I'm not sure that it makes sense to force the Haredi population to go to the army. I think that if we try to force them, it might create a contra effect. Maybe the solution should be attempts to create benefits to someone who goes to the army from that community, and to offer them the ability to work after a short army service, or even a symbolic one, without dedicating or declaring that they are dedicating their lives to study Torah. Because the reality is that because they don't want to go to the army, sometimes because of public pressure within their community, they are stuck in a yeshiva, and not all of them are the brightest students. And for some of them, it would have made much more make sense to go to study a profession, to go to the free market workforce, and they are stuck in yeshiva because that equation of not going to the army is too forceful. So I think that we can reach a reasonable consensus if we'll have bribe politicians to lead us, to lead that compromise. It doesn't look like it's going to happen soon.
Are there people within the Haredi community who would be your interlocutors on something like that you could see might be convinced to even propose that within their communities?
I think so. I think that there is growing number of what we call here in Israel Haredim Chadashim, the new Haredim, people that are educated, people who studied in universities, and like you can see them in many other parts of the world, and it's obvious. Here in Israel, it's not that obvious, and it's a growing number, not huge number, but it is a growing number. I think that the discourse that already developed with that group of people will be meaningful in years to come. I can only hope that it would work, because it's a big part of the Israeli society today. Okay, there are over 1 million Haredim in Israel. They are not going away. We need to find ways to live with them, and I think we can. And this coming Knesset would be probably a landmark, also because of the fact that it would be the first time for not only Orthodox rabbis to serve in the Knesset, but also it will be the first time that a Reform rabbi will probably be a Knesset member. My colleague from the Reform movement for many years, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, is on the labor list, and he's number 4 there. It means that if they are in, he is in, and the polls give them 6 seats in the Knesset. So it means that we will soon have a Reform rabbi, an MK, and it's revolutionary. And I think that discourse might create fruits as well.
Yeah, let's hope. From Carlos Graysborg, what is the role of keeping with the Haredim, what is the role of the Orthodox community in education?
Well, the ultra-Orthodox has some kind of autonomy in their education system. They get support from the government. It's not 100% support, but only 75% support. This gives them the ability not to teach different things that they don't want to teach. The other segments of the Jewish education in Israel is, it's not private, it's like public schools, but yet there are different segments. That there is the Chiloni, the secular public schools, and the Dati Leumi, the National Orthodox public schools. And it means that we can live it through together. Okay, it means that at least when it comes to education, plurality is kept, which is good. There are challenges. We'll not get into it now, but plurality, I think, is kept.
Here's one from Professor Graysborg. David, how do you respond to those who would dampen your optimism by pointing out that 1, the Haredi public is growing, and 2, religiously liberal Jews do not use Robinson's Arch area in significant numbers, namely the Reforming. They're regularly indifferent and are on their way to disappearing by intermarriage and assimilation in the US?
Well, one of the things that Herzl told us, that statistics usually lie when it comes to demography. Okay, I do not want to predict what would happen to either a Jewish population here in Israel or in North America. History taught us more than once that something that should definitely happen does not necessarily happen. And I do think that we need to see how things develop in Israel and also in other parts of the world when it comes to our Jewish nation. I was asked about the Coattail on that matter, and I want to tell you that the Robinson Arch, area is a huge success. The narrative that is not being used is a narrative that is used often by the Orthodox segments who want to bash our side of the Coattail. Because I want to tell you, 24/7, only Haredim are at the Coattail 24/7. People that are not Haredim, and I'm talking about the other segments of Orthodoxy, as well as Reform, Conservative, and others, are not coming to the Kotel on a regular basis. And still, we were able to have at the other side of the Kotel more than 100,000 people before Corona, per year, before the Corona, in almost 1,200 different ceremonies of bar and bar mitzvah. And this is with zero funding. And the basic answer to your question has to do with monies. 3.7 billion shekels are invested in Israeli Orthodox religious services a year, while zero is invested in Reform and Conservative religious services, or almost zero. And when comes to the Kotel, you see the huge budget of the Kotel Heritage Funds that oversights the Orthodox Kotel, while the other side of the Kotel is not funded at all. It means that our ability to give religious services in that place that doesn't look well, that looks neglected, that it doesn't look festive, that doesn't look even respectable enough. Okay, it's wooden platform with black color. That it looks like a temporary place for more than 8 years now. Okay, the fact that still we are able to create such an enthusiasm for people who come, this is something that I'm proud of. Give us 2 years, 3 years, with 10% of the budget of the Kotel Heritage Fund, and you'll see how the average Israeli family is choosing gladly to come to an egalitarian part of the Kotel, a place where the grandmother can stand next to her grandchild or granddaughter to have a bar and bat mitzvah. This is something that speaks so authentically to the Israeli public. And by the way, this is why the more radical Orthodox parts of the equation are against the Kotel compromise, because they do understand that after a few years of working there, we will have at that side of the Kotel the majority of the Israel non-Orthodox public, and it bothers them a lot. So I think that it's when it comes to Israel, to speak about the fact that the Jewish pluralism revolution did not equal the number yet, it's only because the fact that monies were not invested. We do not have an equal platform of views and ideas when it comes to religion in Israel. We will have, and when we have it, you'll see that the Israeli public is changing dramatically. Another reason to be optimistic, Ed.
Oh, great. So here is a lecture from your neighborhood, from Israel. Actually from David Fierstein, the grandson of Rabbi Breger.
Ooh.
Here's the question. I have been living in Israel for 30 years. Things here in many ways are harmonious and at the same time divisive. While I do not condone intolerance on the side of the Haredim and the rabbinate, there are certainly voices within the religious circles that are more inclusive. Can you talk about that and their, quote, approach to the non-Orthodox? Also, when the Western Wall compromise was offered, why was there such a fuss about the separate entrance, not from the plaza?
Okay, you know,
Because it comes
it's a wonderful question. Firstly, you know, when I said that I don't look down on Orthodoxy, God forbid, and I'm not an Orthodox basher, it's not only because this is the right thing to say, but also many of the allies in this battle today in Israel are coming from the Orthodox sector. There are, I'm not sure how to call them, liberal Orthodox Jews in Israel in a growing number that are working side by side with us in various issues of state and religion, because they also understand that no one has a monopoly over Judaism. And you are right, the grandson of Rabbi Breger, that there is a sense of harmony in many places when it comes to these deliberations. And it's unfortunate that usually the headlines are taken by extremists. On that, you are right. Regarding the entrance, one of the things that was a key component of the Kotel compromise is to have one entrance to the Kotel, meaning to symbolize the fact that there is one place that everyone is coming to, and then you choose whatever caters your hashkafa, your beliefs in a better way. And that was part of the deal that was signed. And they, again, it was to enter the Coattail and then to take the right to the egalitarian Coattail or to continue straightforward to the non-egalitarian Coattail. I think it's symbolically right. This is something that Prime Minister Netanyahu told us again and again and again, that he's insisting. He had this slogan, one Coattail to one people, one Coattail to one people. I don't have the same baritone tone to echo his phrase, but this is what he said more than once on record. And the way to implement it was, according to him, one entrance. It didn't work because, again, it symbolized, I think, for the people that are against it, that we are equals. And they couldn't tolerate it, unfortunately.
Okay. Here's one, an anonymous question. How is everything you have discussed with respect to Jewish Israelis and the problems within the Jewish community in the state of Israel impacted by the presence of Arab Israelis and the lack of resolution of the Palestinian problem, or the Palestinian conflict between Israel and the Palestinians?
You know, this is definitely a huge question. This is, in some ways, to describe it, the elephant in the room. Okay, definitely Israel is avoiding with right reasons for many years, and for not the right reasons for other years, from dealing seriously with the conflict with the Arabs. Sometimes it was our fault, sometimes it was their fault. Definitely this is something that needs to be addressed. 20% of the citizens of Israel are Arabs. They have equal rights. They should have equal rights. They should be respected. They should be treated like equal citizens. And as much as I'm a proud Zionist, and I am, this is something that we failed to do for many years. Does it have any implication on state and religion? Yes and no. Yes and no, because unlike the Jewish, within the Jewish faith, within the Muslim faith, there is plurality when it comes to the legal system in Israel. There is more than one Islamic system that is recognized by the state. So it means that if you are Muslim, at least with that regard, there is more plurality when it comes to your personal status. So this is yes and no. Why no? Because since the Arab population in Israel that is represented in the Knesset feels rightly discriminated on many things, there are many issues where they are aligned with the Haredim. For the Haredim to coordinate votes in the Knesset with the Arab United List, it's quite common. Because for them, they say, please help us deal with our Jews, and we will help you on certain things when you want our help. And it creates partnerships that I don't like many times, but this is politics. This is what it is. So it doesn't affect directly, but it does affect the tensions and their ability to be solved indirectly.
You know, we're coming past 20 minutes past the hour, and we've gone a bit over our time. But I have two things I need to respond to. One, Marjorie, yes, I want to tell everyone this lecture is going to be posted through our website and our YouTube channel. It'll take a week or so before it gets all edited and put together, but it will be available. And actually, that's where most people view it at their own time, at their own leisure. So yes, Marjorie, that's going to be taken care of. And here's a question that I know virtually everyone on this thing, on our meeting today, is wanting to know. When will you next be in Tucson? You and your family.
Yeah, we should definitely. Thank you so much for asking. We miss Tucson so much. And, you know, I cannot tell you how formative our experience in Tucson was in so many ways. Jewishly, I just described, but not only Jewishly. The sense of community, the openness, the fact that, you know, Israeli life is so tensed, and in Tucson, life is relaxed, and it's relaxed from the most positive way of looking at life. This is something that we learn to appreciate, and Yael and myself feel that we got a present that 3 years in our lives we were able to live in Tucson, in a community, both the university community and the Jewish community, and in a way that opened our horizons to so many things. And it's not only, I think that we miss you guys more than you miss us.
That would actually start an argument, I'm sure, with a good. I can tell you that your warm regards are reflected back to you and the family in the thousands. And so we want to thank you for taking this time to spend with us. We know it's late for you, and the warmth that you feel that you got, we feel we got even more in return. So thank you, Yizhar, for a great presentation. I'm going to say thank you on behalf of the 50-some people who are here now and the thousands who will watch it online later. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Everyone, we have another lecture coming up here in the next few weeks. You'll be hearing those from Judaic Studies. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.